Why did David Foster Wallace, for most of his career, never admit that he was an addict? Because I'm sure, as you already know, when you read Infinite Jest, there are these authentic and intricate scenes about Alcoholics Anonymous and addiction. And you're like, holy hell, how is he able to write about this? He must have gone through with some of this. But when reporters would ask him, hey, how do you know about this? He would go, yeah, well, I have some friends in the program, and I attended some meetings, but a lot of it's just research and understanding and talking to them and the imagination. And this hiding away that Wallace does is something very similar to what writers are doing today in 2024. And that's why mental health issues and self-doubt and identity issues, not just in the artistic world, but in the world at large, is connected to what Wallace was starting to feel, this self-consciousness back in the 90s. And we are supposed to be living in the time of expression and acceptance and affirmation that you can be and do whatever you want. But we also live in the most self-conscious time of all time, because if you just sit and dye your hair blue and talk about your trauma, you are not actually doing anything. There's been this idea that the talking cure, that just sharing your confessions about your life and just trauma dumping on everyone is actually going to do something. I'm sure you guys have experienced this before. You're hanging out with someone and you have to hear about what their mom did and their dad did. And that's okay. But then you're like, maybe you try to offer a solution or anything actionable. And it's like, whoa. I'm just going to take my meds, talk, and I don't want to do anything else. And it feels like I'm with the underground man all the time. There's people just complaining about their tooth, but not wanting to do anything about it and being happy that they have a screwed up tooth. Imagine hanging out with me and I was like, bro, look at my finger. It's dislocated. Like, holy hell. And you're like, go to the doctor. I was like, oh, well, look, And if you are still confused about life, it's probably because you are not subscribed to this channel. Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to David Foster Wallace on YouTube. And if you're interested in more videos on Wallace, go check out the playlist down below. So we all have trauma, whether it's from childhood or adulthood, or just us having to live and experience the weight of reality. And the way that you transform and pull yourself out of addiction or into higher consciousness requires hard work, because we have been programmed to think that we can have these Satori awakenings. And Satori in Buddhism or in the East are these instant awakenings. If you look at like this famous Zen monk and poet Ikkyu, he would be out on the rowboat, for instance, have this instant awakening into enlightenment. And you hear about these things sometimes. Sometimes someone has a Kundalini awakening or connects with Christ and moves to this higher phase of consciousness. But most of the time, it either causes someone to go crazy or to eventually recidivize back into their old life. And this is because a lot of these monks that had these Satori awakenings or whoever had a great foundation, below them. So when they went to the next level, it's not like they were, just dropped on Mount Everest and told to acclimate. They were already close to the top. And we are living in a more complex universe with, technology and stuff than ever. And so our self-consciousness, our own problems with our own identity and whatnot can be a mess to solve. And the bigger the problem, the bigger the transformation required to be able to fix it. And this is what Wallace was going through. So when we look at his addiction and Wallace was attending 2 Alcoholic Anonymous meetings a day for over a decade. He made recovery a central part of his life, so much so that he was not just going to those meetings, he was going to other men's meetings and other groups and being a sponsor and getting sponsored. He was also maintaining a bunch of other healthy habits to help maintain his sobriety. And Wallace's deepest relationship, other than with his wife, was with Mary Carr. And if you recognize her name, she's the one who came out with the allegations later on after Wallace died against him, saying that he threw a coffee table at her, that he threw her out of a moving car, that he plotted to kill her husband and stuff like that. Like nothing too crazy, but allegations like that. But the reason that they broke up was that Wallace was so focused on his recovery. And she kind of wanted, from what it seems like, a codependent relationship, because she was going through a lot of problems and whatnot. And it seems like she just wanted him there all the time. So she would have this important event going on. He'd be like, hey, I have to go to a meeting. Hey, I have to work out. I can't help you with this. And it seems like she was looking for someone who was much more reliable, and judging from the people that she got with after Wallace, that is backed up. So eventually she pulls away from Wallace, who is just out of recovery, hasn't, in the process of writing Infinite Jest, and he went berserk, allegedly, with some of these allegations that we've heard. And to expect a recovering addict not to be weird, not to make mistakes, not to go crazy is crazy. But eventually, by the time Infinite Jest comes out, Wallace had been sober for 4 or 5 years at least by that point. And so why, when reporters started to ask him about this, for almost the rest of his life, he'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I wasn't an addict. I spent some time in a facility after a suicide attempt, which happened while he was at Harvard's philosophy program. But I've never done heroin or any of these things. And so there are two different paths that we can go here. The first one I want to believe more, which is when you read Infinite Jest, there's not really spoilers here, but within it, there's this moment where there are a couple, one of the characters is at an Narcotics Anonymous meeting, and there are 3 different speeches given. The first one is by this guy who thinks he's doing a great job and like this very good, eloquent speaker, and everyone hates him because he's not being authentic. He's turning this whole thing into a show. But then there's these other 2 people, and they're kind of like weird and creepy, and they just get up there and kind of put their head down and just start talking and tell the most insane story, and everyone's captivated by it. And one of the biggest symbols and statuses of authority within these circles of addiction is authenticity. Sharing what you've done, sharing your story without being scared. And doing that for people is liberating. Being able to speak without judgment to this very large group of people who will support you must feel great. I know all of you guys have felt this before. When you confess something, something weird about yourself or something you feel guilty about to someone that you know, it feels awesome. But imagine if you have this deep addiction and you've hurt everyone in your life and bottomed out, and then you're speaking to people. It's awesome. And Wallace Wallace was at these meetings. He shared his life. He understood that the logical mind, the overthinking mind isn't authentic, that he just had to be Dave from a small town in the Midwest, not this big author, if he was going to get the experience. Because by sharing, then others bring you in closer. You start to move away from overthinking, which is the killer of sobriety, because all addicts engage in these very fantastical fantasies. And that's most of the time what pulls them in. They get triggered mentally long before they relapse. And so we might have a similar situation here to what kind of Cormac McCarthy did with his own writing, that he didn't want to talk about it because there was a magic surrounding it. And when Wallace was asked to speak about addiction and these things, he could talk about it from the periphery. But when having to speak about himself, he was still a recovering addict. People who are really deep, they never stop attending meetings, and maybe they do, but for a long time, they have to keep up with, not relapsing. So he's sitting here and being asked these questions, and they're in these weird little interview formats with these shitty questions. It's not like a nice podcast where he can sit and explain things and be with someone who's nice. They're a random reporter from Salon or Esquire or something, and they're just going to take a bite piece from this thing that he's going to say. And so how can he magnify or captured the weight of his transformation, of all this work that he put in, everything that he gave up, the daily routine that he goes through to maintain his sobriety in this little bite-sized paragraph, especially through the oral word. He was much more eloquent when it came to writing. And so that seems like one of the main theories that I think you could come up with, that he didn't want to ruin that experience because it was still ongoing with him. And that by saying that, other people, he might be turned into kind of the king of Alcoholics Anonymous, be turned into the symbol that was bigger or contested the group. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's about the group. You're doing your own individual recovery, but you're all doing it together. And so I do like that theory. But another theory, which relates to a lot of what we're going through as authors right now, is judgment from others. Wallace's mother was a narcissist by his own admission. And you can find this in the David Foster Wallace archive. In the book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, there's a line in that book that talks about narcissistic mothers, and he puts her initials by it. I have a video. I'll remember. If I don't, someone leave a comment down below. I have like an hour and a half review on that book. I did back when I had like 50 subscribers. If you guys are interested, it's called The Drama, I think, of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. And this was something, actually, this is kind of for another video, that Wallace was engaging in heavily in therapy and with others and with his girlfriends, was like trying to get over this weird mother trauma he had, because it was immense. The headmistress in Infinite Jest is actually based on his mother, and he, for a long time, almost until the novel was getting published, refused to send her a copy because he knew that she was going to read it deeply because she was very smart and connect a lot of the stuff about her to herself. And from what I could tell, Wallace did seem terrified about people judging him. That's one of the things we talked about earlier about him always having this self-consciousness in his writing. He wanted to get ahead of people criticizing him. And being an addict is actually, or a recovering addict, for a lot of people in society is a sign of weakness. For instance, if someone tells me that they're a recovering addict and like it hasn't been too long, I'm going to have a lot of safety guards and red flags up and be watching them very closely, if not totally rejecting them from my life. I'm a pretty open-minded person, but I have been burned by many addicts in the past and been way too kind, way too open-minded. And now that I have a family and a life and these types of things, I can't be risking stuff like that anymore. And Wallace obviously knew this stigma. And for him to talk about it, he didn't want it to seem lame because when you actually talk about what you're doing in AA and the 12 steps and stuff, it kind of sounds a little bit funny because it's this crazy process where you have to give up a lot of rationality and do the moral inventory with God. Ask God and say, I don't have the power to do this. I think that's like step 5 or 6. You have to help me. And so you seem like this powerless person. And for someone who was in so much control of his writing, who was helicoptered by his mom and helicoptered his own life in terms of how intricate he was getting, I think that admitting that idea was a massive blow to his ego. And so turning Sauron's eye back toward you, what addictions are you still holding in? What ideas are holding you back from unleashing your artistic potential on the world? Because I want to analyze Wallace's career here. I think that if he owned up to it, if he talked about a lot of the things that he was going through, he might still be alive today, because there's this narrative that he couldn't survive without, he gets off these antidepressants and then tries to get back on, get on some new ones, don't work, tries to get back on the old ones, don't work, and then he kills himself. He's not the first person to have gone through that. There have been other people who have gone through that and survived that ordeal. So there was still things foundationally wrong with Wallace. For instance, if we look at his life before the suicide, he was experiencing massive amounts of writer's block and identity issues. He was on kind of cruise control in life, just teaching, hanging out. He wasn't pushing himself probably in the same ways of transformation and recovery as he was doing before, even though he was eating healthier and I think had quit nicotine and stuff. But why didn't his family? So he was going downhill. And he actually had tried to kill himself before he actually killed himself. There was a suicide attempt, and Jonathan Franzen came, and his parents came, and he lost like 60 pounds. Why wasn't he in a medical facility? If my wife was going through that, if she had tried to kill herself and lost all this weight, I'd be monitoring her, 24/7 until she was objectively better for months. I would not be leaving her alone. I'd be not leaving the house so that she could hang herself. I would not be hiding this. So why were they hiding it? And now I'm just, speculating here, obviously, but I think it was because a lot of these issues weren't out in the open, that no one really knew that he suffered from depression, that he was a recovering addict, that he had all this childhood trauma. And so once again, we're back at the balance, because you don't want to be the person who's oversharing everything, but you also don't want to be the person who doesn't share anything. And then when you're in a time of need, especially if you're a sensitive person, if you're kind of a stoic guy like Cormac McCarthy or someone, and you've got your stuff together, then okay, you don't need to share anything. Like, who cares? Like, everything's going to be fine with you. But if you're someone who's had problems in the past, it's better. And you're famous, for instance, if you're famous, it's better to have some of that out there, because I would feel like there's this enormous weight that if I check into rehab or if I do something, there's going to be big articles about it. It's going to get some attention, which it would have if news was getting out that David Foster Wallace was trying to kill himself for the second time in his life. And so what you can do now with your art is express yourself fully. First of all, don't be scared. Don't use a pen name. We need 50,000 David Foster Wallaces or Cormac McCarthys. We need 50,000 great thinkers and, people who speak about writing and writers. We don't need one. This isn't about you. We need 50,000. And that's if we even just want to start competing against some of the bigger art forms. Right now, what do we have? Like 50, if that, who are actually alive still? How many of them are also just kind of hidden away? If we want a literary renaissance, we need real men and real women who are willing to stand behind their work, who aren't worried about their personal identity or the attention that's going to be about them, because it's not about you. It's about creating an educational awakening, because we're going in the opposite direction now at a very rapid pace. I guess if we expand out to Africa and places where people are just getting education for the first time, then maybe not. But in America, in the public school systems here, we are slowly shriveling away. And we don't need any more plain authors. We don't need any more reclusive authors. We actually have enough information to make the educational transformation and psychological and spiritual transformations that we need. We don't need any more books, any more videos, any more anything, actually, if we just look back at the past and all the information that's there. But obviously, people aren't going to do that. So there's two different things that can happen. If there's a writer out there and they're really good, like Cormac McCarthy or David Foster Wallace, I want to hear them speak. I want to hear them talk. I was so excited when I saw those new Cormac McCarthy interviews get released a couple years ago. I was like, oh my God. So education can move in that direction. There can be writers or something or artists, and then you want to hear them talk. You want to see their personality. And in that like talking, they're going to further educate you. When I hear Cormac McCarthy and David Foster Wallace like giving interviews, they teach me something. Like they have a deep amount of knowledge about other people that I've never heard of before. It's not like I'm like mindlessly watching like Joe Rogan or someone and like just like maybe laughing and getting like in a 3-hour podcast, like hearing maybe one thing I've never heard of before. You're kind of getting hit with information, which is awesome, which creates growth. And then there are people like myself who talk about art, and then people want to read their writing. If I release a book, you may be interested in it. You're like, hey, I've listened to this guy for hundreds of hours. Like, let's see what he has to say in writing. And writing is a totally different format and hits people differently. But when those two come together, it's magical. And that's why I'm really excited to move into writing more. But if you are someone with a pen name, if you're someone who kind of refuses to do media and share things at a deeper level with your audience, you're missing out on all this. And once again, we come back to this idea, are you going to be authentic? When I come on here, I say things that piss people off all the time. I joke about religion almost every single day. So today I got someone telling me that I need to look deeper into Christianity and talk to real Christians because I'm missing the point, even though I've read easily over 100 books on Christianity and listened to endless amounts of talks. And the reason they said that is because I'm always making fun of Christianity, making fun of religion, and saying how we need to transcend it and how we're not going to be able to get to the next level. So on Instagram today, I posted this: how I feel daily when religious people ask me to explain why we have to transcend Christ/Muhammad. And then there's a quote from Dune: most people believe that a satisfactory future requires a return to an idealized past, a past which never in fact existed. 78% of Americans identify as religious. Whether it's, Jewish, Islam, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, the traditional major world religion, 78%. And here I am, at least every other video, saying stuff about it. I'm also talking about politics all the time, making fun of Republicans and Democrats. That's like 90% of the country. Then you start calling people NPCs and like, is that good for the business? Is that good to bring people in and make everyone feel welcome? Probably not. That's who I am. That's what I believe. That's what, if you're going to sit and talk to me behind closed doors, that's what I'm going to be saying. I don't need to sit and apologize and be like, all you Christians out there, you guys, I'm so impressed that you took an allegory and turned it into literalism. I respect that. And if you're a Christian who thinks I'm a sinner and going to hell, then just tell me that. Don't sit and be like, everyone has their own beliefs. You believe that I'm going to hell. It's okay. Just say it. And the reason people don't want to do this is that we're self-conscious of the hate, of what other people are going to think. We think that people actually care about us. But it's a sad thing to come to, but most people couldn't care. So you want to crank up that authenticity factor. And when I hear David Foster Wallace talking, when you see like his interviews and he's always self-correcting and being weird and like kind of talking slow, I'm like, what is he censoring? Why doesn't he just speak? Why doesn't he kind of go berserk like he does in fiction? But in fiction, he is able to hide behind a wall. He's able to say, well, that's a character talking. But in person, you have to say, this is Ian talking. This is David talking. So this functions on both levels, though, because I know a lot of people who, censor themselves in their art. Don't censor yourself in your art, and don't censor yourself in how you're speaking into the world. If you get fired from your job, if your family says something, if your wife says something, so be it. If you're wrong, you're wrong. You may need to fess up and say, hey, I had the totally kind of bad point of view on this thing. I've done that before on this channel. It's not the end of the world. But eventually, it's going to prevent yourself. The reason that this is important is that one day, if you bottom out, you're going to have all this stuff out there and people are going to know about you and be able to help you. But if no one knows who you actually are or what you're going through or what you have been through in the past, then you're going to be alone. And then if you have a group of incompetent people around you, seemingly, that was like who are around David Foster Wallace, then you're going to be knocking at death's door. And at its core level, it's a sense of hubris that you can solve it all yourself. It's back to that idea about addiction. It's the overthinking mind thinking that I can construct this character instead of just being yourself. I was a ski instructor in Oregon for a year like 10, 11 years ago. And I went up there with a buddy, and he had very little wilderness and like backcountry skiing experience. I had grown up doing it and like done a bunch with my dad and my uncle and stuff. And I had a pretty good knowledge, but while you're backcountry skiing, that you have to be humble, that you have to take things easy, understand where you're at, check for avalanches, do these other things. And this guy I grew up with didn't really have that experience. He had like just kind of gotten into skiing and gotten really good at it in like a year, but it was all just kind of inbound skiing and mostly just like park skiing, like rails and jumps. And while doing some backcountry skiing, I wasn't there. He got cocky because he wasn't being authentic. He wasn't being authentic about how much he actually didn't know about this, not just about backcountry skiing, but we were in Oregon, and the terrain up on Mount Hood is wild. People die up there every single year, even in the summer. And he was cocky, way too cocky about what he knew, thought he knew. And he broke off from a group while doing backcountry skiing. That group around him was also incompetent. He chose himself to surround himself with incompetent people who didn't immediately call search and rescue. He went off on his own and ended up falling in like a kind of hidden river underneath some snow and drowned to death. This is a guy who was like my best friend for years. But he didn't learn to admit that he was wrong. He didn't get over that hubris. During that time, I also had a hubris. I wasn't the best roommate. I didn't clean enough. I didn't really ever lived with anyone before. I kind of just had this routine. I clean up like once a week. But when you're living with, sharing a room with people and living in a small apartment with a ton of different people, you can't be doing that. And I remember getting checked and getting humbled and resisting for a while and actually getting thrown out of that apartment, which was wild, but it helped me grow, and it helped me for the rest of my life never get in that situation again. I had this major weakness. I had some pride surrounding it. Like, I can do my own thing, but I was like, no, I'm going to have to learn to live with other people. And I've lived with other people for the last 11 years and never had a problem again. But when I move in with someone, I always say, hey, for a while, I was like super messy. I didn't really take care of things. And so if you ever see me slacking off, just say something and I'll snap right back into it. And I'm sorry if that ever happens. But if I didn't say something, someone would maybe take offense to it. Like, does this guy not care? This guy's a freaking asshole. But instead, now everything gets resolved. And I hope you guys can do the same thing with some of the problems and weaknesses, addictions in your own life. And I'm actually going to be starting very soon. If you made it through this video, I understand it's kind of been a rant fest, but whatever. I'm starting a course based on this book. It's called Witness to the Fire, Creativity and the Veil of Addiction. For anyone out there who is dealing with any type of addiction, because addiction isn't just like, hey, I'm on heroin. You may be addicted to marijuana. I know I was at some point in my life. You may be addicted to alcohol. I know I was at some point in my life. You may be addicted to any type of drug. You may be going through codependency or be addicted to digital technology or porn or any of these other types of things, or coffee or food or certain mindsets. Like, addiction isn't some thing that needs to mean that like you're stealing all your money away. It's something that you constantly have to do. And sometimes it's like negatively affecting you. And if you try to get off it, it causes kind of withdrawal symptoms. I was a caffeine addict for God knows how long. And some people can handle caffeine fine, but I can't drink caffeine one day and not get a headache the next day. I have to continuously keep drinking it and upping the doses and like moving to some crazy caffeine migraine land. And it's not for me. And so I'm going to be running a free course over on the Right Conscious Substack very soon. By the time you see this, it will probably already be up. Just walking through the connection between addiction and creativity, because a lot of us who are creatives, who are writers, who are artists, who are even readers, kind of more eccentric types of people, are actually more have a disposition that's actually connected to higher rates of addiction. And actually the act of being creative can lead to problems with addiction or kind of open that pathway up. And you have to be aware of that. And so I'll be sharing some of my experiences and kind of going through this workbook. And it's a combination of the 12 steps and the Jungian archetypes. It's pretty light on the 12-step stuff, but it's kind of looking at creativity and addiction through the Jungian archetypes, and also in combination with literature. So for instance, like one of the Jungian archetypes is the gambler. And so we get to see Dostoevsky's The Gambler kind of broken down and shown how it Alexei, I think his name is, in The Gambler, and how he represents this certain archetype of addiction and creativity. So super cool stuff. I'll see you guys in there, and I'll see you guys in the next video.